ていた僕の目に映る君は綺麗だ明けない夜にこぼれた涙も君の笑顔に溶けてく変わらない日々に泣いていた僕を君は優しく終わりへと誘う沈むように溶けてゆくように染みついた霧が晴れる忘れてしまいたくて閉じ込めた日々に差し伸べてくれた君の手を取る涼しい風が空を泳ぐように今吹き抜けてゆく繋いだ手を離さないでよ二人今夜に駆け出してく
Today we're talking about every infinite loop strategy in the modern competitive Pokemon trading card game. What is an infinite loop? Well, it's basically a combination of cards that provides the user with either infinite resources or a way to permanently prevent decking out. This video starts from cards released in 2011 in the black and white base set and moves forward in chronological order. If you enjoy the video at any time, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. The first infinite loop that I can find being competitively viable in the modern Pokemon TCG is actually one of the greatest infinite loops ever. This deck came together over the span of years, with some extremely old cards that were previously deemed unviable at the time, combining to create the archetype that won the 2013 US National Championships, which is now rebranded as the North American International Championships, or NAIC for short. This deck was built around the ability of a card that really should have never been viable. Gothitelle, from all the way back in Noble Victories in 2011, has the ability Magic Room, which prevents your opponent from playing any item cards while Gothitelle is in the active spot. However, Gothitelle's attack is hot garbage, and it was also a stage 2 weak to Psychic when Mewtwo EX was dominating the meta, so it isn't hard to see why it was so bad. But looking at the card pool at the time, if there was some way to keep Gothitelle in the active spot, then the opponent could usually never move it, since Pokemon Catcher was an item card and the only trainer-based gust available. There was a stage 1 Ninetales that gusted when it was put into play, but that's a stage 1 and was very unsplashable. The key to this deck though was Accelgor from Dark Explorers with the deck and cover attack, which does 50 damage, paralyzes the opponent, and crucially shuffles Accelgor into your deck. This means that once deck and cover was used, you could promote Gothitelle and item lock the opponent, preventing them from playing Switch or Escape Rope to cure the paralysis. With Floatstone, you could feasibly retreat your Gothitelle for free into a fresh Accelgor right after, or more accurately Mew EX, who could copy Accelgor's attack for 1 double colorless energy on a basic. The final piece to the deck was Dusknoir from Boundaries Cross. Its ability Sinister Hand is completely broken, allowing you to freely move damage on your opponent's board in any way you like, whenever you want. This was crucial to the strategy since you could now use deck and cover for 50, promote Gothitelle, then next turn Dusknoir all the damage from your opponent's active to their bench Pokemon, and then keep swinging over and over again once you built up enough damage, and then you would win the game in one big turn. However, there was a problem for this strategy on face value. Keldeo EX. With its ability Rush In, it could switch itself into the active spot if it's on the bench, curing the paralysis, and then with a Floatstone it could retreat into your attacker. However, just playing one Keldeo EX was definitely not enough, since the Gothitelle player could just Pokemon Catcher up the Keldeo and trap that with paralysis. So surely 2 Keldeo EX and Floatstones is enough, right? Wrong. Floatstone was considered an item card back then, unlike tools are now, meaning if you rushed in your Keldeo, you still had to retreat it with manual attachments, giving the Gothitelle player more time to run you out of energy. Gothitelle Accelgor lists almost always played Tool Scrapper to ensure that Floatstones could not be attached to Keldeo, but there was a counter. Darkrai EX, 2 Keldeo EX, and 2 Darkness Energy would provide infinite switching and retreating, and you would win the game if you had this combo. But you did need all of that on your bench, nothing to be prized, and an attacker that was also charged up and ready to go. This deck was extremely solid, and the only reason it didn't do very good at the World Championships that year was because almost every top player was teching for it, including 1st, 2nd, and 3rd place. Sableye from Dark Explorers has the extremely broken Junk Hunt attack, putting 2 item cards from the discard pile into your hand for 1 dark energy. This card was in the 2013 World Championship winning deck, although it wasn't mainly used as an infinite loop in that strategy, more as an early game piece to recycle dark patches, or hypnotoxic lasers to build up damage and energy. But in expanded format with item cards like Crushing Hammer, Enhanced Hammer, Hypnotoxic Laser, and Life Dew, the opponent was basically forced to never play the game. The strategy was so broken with the Life Dew Ace spec that prevents an opponent from taking a prize on a Sableye with it attached, that Sableye was banned in expanded format forever, rightfully so. The next Infinite Loop is probably the most famous, Lysandre's Trump Card and VS Seeker. Lysandre's Trump Card just shuffles both players' entire discard piles into their deck, except for any copies of Lysandre's Trump Card. And VS Seeker is an item card that just puts the supporter from the discard pile into your hand. And you could Trump Card to recover VS Seeker, which then recovered Trump Card, and you could just infinitely loot both players' decks. After some insane abuse with Seismitoad EX and Shaymin EX in a few months after its release, this card was rightfully banned in Standard and Expanded just a few weeks of Roaring Skies releasing. And with it, Night March was finally made viable. Lysandre's Trump Card is undoubtedly the most poorly designed card in Pokemon TCG history, and it's not very hard to see why. That was probably the most exacerbated Infinite Loop ever, right? But what about one that's a little bit more subtle? It takes a little bit of a brain to understand this one. Lusamine from Crimson Invasion is a supporter card that just puts 2 in any combination of supporter cards and stadiums from the discard pile into your hand. What's wrong about this? You can recover a Guzma, you can recover, a Shrine of Punishment. Wait, you can also recover a Lusamine? Okay, you can just recover a Lusamine and anything else and loop forever. This card is so incredibly flawed, but it was mainly used in control and wall strategies and not so much abused in regular attacking decks. In stall and wall decks built around cards like Hoopa, which had an ability making it immune to GXs, and Regigigas, who was just built different. It was just massive. Looping supporter cards like Acerola to heal the walls, Team Rocket's handiwork to repeatedly mill the opponent, and Plumeria to discard energy was part of their main strategy. This loop won multiple tournaments in wall decks built around Regigigas and Hoopa, and it also saw some abuse in expanded formats to the point where it actually got banned and expanded for a short period of time, although it is unbanned now. Shock lock strategies refer to strategies that, similarly to the Gothitelle Accelgor deck, aim to permanently lock something in the active spot with paralysis, preventing the opponent from attacking or retreating until the end of that player's turn, where you then repeat the process again. The only Shock Lock deck I can see having a result in Standard format was this deck from Sander built around Raichu from Burning Shadows, which paralyzed the opponent once evolved, De-Evolution Spray, which, de-evolves Raichu, and then Heatmore for 1 double colorless energy, flips 2 coins, and puts a card from the discard into your hand for each head. Sander played this with Victini from Guardians Rising, which allowed you to reflip coins if you didn't like the result. And with this combo, you could pretty much infinitely paralyze the opponent. Shout out to this promo Pikachu that Sander also played, which has an attack that paralyzes the opponent on a coin flip, meaning that even when your opponent was ability locking you with Garbodor or Greninja, you could still use paralysis. However, this strategy was borderline unviable in Standard, aside from that very specific meta, because almost every deck was on multiple copies of Guzma. And with some of the most popular decks on 4 copies of Guzma, it's hard to see a world where Shock Lock was viable, since Guzma was basically just 4 switch cards each player had, as well as a Gust that could target down your Pikachus. If not for Guzma, who knows how good this loop could have been in Standard. In expanded format, this strategy uses Lillipup from all the way back in Black and White base set in 2011, which has an attack that puts an item from the discard into your hand. It also used Herdier, which evolves from Lillipup, recovering items when it's evolved once per turn, and Stoutland, which evolves and when it's in the active spot, blocks supporter cards, including Guzma. With Memory Energy allowing you to copy Lillipup's attack, this deck would basically just use Raichu Devolution Spray and pick up from Lillipup with Stoutland in the active spot to permanently Shock Lock. Tech cards like Goodra, which turned off all tool cards, and Alolan Muck could be used to disable common counterplay like Garbodor's ability lock, Russian abilities of Dawnwing's Necrozma and Keldeo, as well as the Stealthy Hood tool card, which blocks Raichu's ability from paralyzing the Pokemon it's attached to. These techs made the deck a little bit more consistent, and it gave it some pretty good results in expanded format major events. Up next, we have the face of control decks from Sun and Moon, Oranguru. Oranguru is a very simple card. It has an attack for 1 colorless energy that puts 3 cards from the discard pile on the bottom of your deck in any order. This seems very uninspiring at first glance, since you have to attack with the semi-frail Oranguru in order to get this effect, and the opponent could just knock it out, right? Couldn't they? Well, players found out pretty quickly that if you played enough energy disruption, you could completely block your opponent from damaging Oranguru, at which point you could use Oranguru to recycle resources that you used to discard energy, and you would repeat this until your opponent ran out of energy and lost the game. Articuno GX's GX attack discards all energy from your opponent's active Pokemon, and its ability just flung it into the active spot when it was benched. Crushing Hammer, Enhanced Hammer, and Plumeria could all discard energies from your opponent, and Pidgeotto's Airmail ability, which is the identical ability to Dracloak's Recon Directive, functioned as the draw engine for the deck, since you could use Professor Elm's Lecture, which searches for 3 Pokemon that have 60 HP or less, to set up Pidgeys and Pidgeotto very efficiently. But players took it a step further once Unified Minds released and Reset Stamp became legal. If you forced the opponent to go down to 3 prize cards left, which was pretty easy since the opponent kind of had to take prizes or else they'd lose the game, you could use Reset Stamp to set them to a 3-card hand. Then play Lieutenant Surge's strategy, which lets you just play 2 more supporters this turn, which is definitely a great idea, thanks for that one. Then play Jesse and James, which discards 2 cards from each player's hand. And with your opponent at just a 1-card hand, you would play Mars to discard your opponent's final card and draw 2 as a bonus. Left with 0 cards left in their hand, Chip Ice Axe would allow you to control the opponent's top deck out of the top 3 cards of their deck. And then Oranguru could easily recycle Pal Pad to recover Surge and Jesse and James, as well as Chip Ice Axes to infinitely control the opponent's top deck and discard any energy cards they drew into and attached. You would repeat this process until your opponent decked out and you won the game. This strategy was known as Pidgeotto Control and was pretty successful in standard format, placing highly at the World Championships in 2019, placing second at multiple regional championships in 2019, and being an overall solid metagame pick in the last formats of Sun and Moon. But almost every card I just named, including Oranguru, was banned and expanded for being too toxic. And honestly, that was a pretty good idea, because I cannot imagine expanded format being balanced if Lieutenant Surge's strategy was legal. Suicune GX has an ability that when it's on your bench, you can just shuffle it and all cards attached to it into your deck. This was only used in stall decks to prevent decking out infinitely, and is functionally identical to Pidgeot V from Lost Origin. However, Pidgeot V wasn't just used in control decks and actually saw a decent amount of play in Lost Box decks, mainly since Lost Box decks dug to the bottom of their decks so egregiously fast that you kind of needed a way to prevent yourself from decking out sometimes. And when you were using Kyogre, it was really essential to make sure you could pull off that big energy recycler play and blow up the opponent. Also, it enabled for a Seal Stone in decks like Snorlax and Lost Box, which made it more than just a deck out prevention, but also a little bit of consistency. The last loop I'll mention in the Sun and Moon era is Florges Dudunsparce. Florges has an ability that flips a coin, and if it's heads, it puts an item card from the discard pile on top of your deck, with Rabombi preventing the opponent from using Guzma or Boss to bring up your bench fairy Pokemon, and Lily's Pokédoll, which denies prize cards when it's knocked out. You can almost infinitely loop Lily's Pokédoll and prevent your opponent from taking any prize cards until they deck out. This deck actually got 5th place at LAIC 2020 without Rabombi, mainly because that format lacked supporter-based Gust, and the only Gust was Custom Catcher, which very few decks were on. Great Catcher was the best Gust option, but it didn't work against the strategy since it didn't play any GX Pokemon, so you can't Gust any non-GX Pokemon. Shout out to Munchlax actually, who featured in this list, who has free retreat and ends your turn by flipping a coin, and if heads, it puts any card from the discard pile on top of your deck. This actually could become its own infinite loop with Will, a supporter card which rigs coin flips, meaning you could play Will, Munchlax, flip heads guaranteed, put a Pal Pad on top of your deck, and then use Pal Pad to recycle Will and another supporter from the discard pile. Florges Dudunsparce was way better in expanded format, where it also played Robo Substitute for a very similar lock where you just prevented your opponent from taking any prize cards. And if the opponent never attacked and tried to get you to deck out, I mean, that was basically impossible since Florges could infinitely recycle resources, and Lily's Pokédoll itself actually had an effect where if it was in the active spot, you could put it on the bottom of your deck and then promote something else, meaning you could prevent deck out with that too. Eldegoss V at first glance just looks like some ordinary support Pokemon that gives you more outs to find the game-winning boss that prompts your opponent to flip the table on you. But once Double Turbo Energy released, Eldegoss V became a true infinite loop, since you could use Eldegoss to bring back Bird Keeper from the discard pile, use Bird Keeper to switch Eldegoss into the active spot, draw the last cards of your deck with Bird Keeper, and then use Eldegoss's attack to shuffle it into your deck with the DTE. This loop pretty much just prevented deck out since it didn't essentially recover infinite resources, but this combo was used by the legendary Sander Wojcik in his, wait for it, Umbreon VMAX, Cheryl, Sun and Moon Badge, Eldegoss V, Bird Keeper, Pyukumuku Stall Deck. No, I'm not joking. You need to say all those cards, trust me. You would get 2 Umbreon VMAX in play, tank a hit with one that had a Sun and Moon Badge equipped. The Sun and Moon Badge basically just prevents your opponent from gusting the Pokemon into the active spot with boss's orders. Then once you tank the hit with the Sun and Moon Badge, you would use Eldegoss to grab Bird Keeper back, Bird Keeper into Eldegoss, DTE, float up, and then promote an Umbreon that just had a regular air balloon attached. Then once your opponent attacked into that Umbreon and didn't 1-hit KO it. By the way, this only really worked because 1-hit KO attackers like Goldengo and Raging Bolt literally just did not exist, and if they did exist, they were not good. Anyways, you would use Eldegoss to grab Cheryl from the discard pile, which heals all damage from all of your evolution Pokemon and discards energy attached to them. Then you would go Air Balloon Free Retreat into Eldegoss, float up again, and you could infinitely loop this and prevent the opponent from doing any damage forever. Eventually, either your opponent would deck out, or you would do so much damage with the 30 from float up every turn that you would take 6 prize cards and win the game. I'm not even joking. You would win such a long game 1 by doing this that you would basically have no time to finish a game 2 and you would win the set. The thing I find most hilarious about this deck though is that Tool Scrapper was legal, and one copy of Tool Scrapper would almost always auto-win the matchup. So Sander basically just went into EUIC and said, look, I know for a fact you do not have a Tool Scrapper in your deck, and made them regret it like a Dango player after facing 4 Cornerstone in a row. Unreal. Cyllene is a card from Astral Radiance that flips 2 coins and puts a card from your discard pile on top of your deck for each heads. This card doesn't appear to be some sort of infinite loop at first glance, but trust me it is. With 2 Cyllene, 2 to 3 Pal Pad, and Team Yell's Cheer, which shuffles 3 supporters or Pokemon from the discard into your deck, you could almost never deck out, to the point that this is definitely an infinite loop. Trust me, I have like a sad amount of games on block Snorlax, and I've only decked out because of this combo failing once. And that was after I had used almost all my resources. If you can just manage your resources better than an orangutan, okay, maybe not that orangutan, he was built different, alright? But you would basically just be able to loop infinite supporter cards, item cards, stadiums, or whatever you wanted, just with Cyllene and a few Pal Pad. I can't explain to you how funny it was to Cyllene loop Lost Vacuum 4 times in a row in order to beat Cloth Terapagos by running them out of Ancient Booster Energy Capsules. But once Bidoof released, this matchup went from pretty much an auto win to an auto loss, and I don't know, that sucks. The Cyllene loop was featured in every successful control deck after it released, including Mewtwo V Union, Pidgeot Control, Snorlax Sol, and Yveltal Spam Control. These decks have won at least 5 combined regional championships and undoubtedly cemented Cyllene and Pal Pad as one of the greatest infinite loops in Pokemon history. Abra from Twilight Masquerade and Dudunsparce from Temporal Forces both provide a way to prevent decking out, with a free retreater or a jet energy shuffling Abra back into your deck infinitely with its ability, and Dudunsparce shuffling itself back infinitely as long as you have enough Dunsparces and Dudunsparce in your deck. Abra was only really used in this one Spidops EX control deck that some brain-dead individual originally made and played to Portland, and Dudunsparce has only one limitless result in a control deck used as an infinite loop, where it was also played by the same lunatic who was one of only 2 players on the deck in the entire tournament. Shout out to Psyduck. And that's the video. Some other infinite loops I didn't mention that did exist in expanded format include the recently banned Flapple card from Sword and Shield. With Force of Vitality, you could pretty much infinitely damage the opponent by using Flapple with Force of Vitality, shuffling it back into your deck, and then just doing it over and over again. Rototiller Bunnelby and Rototiller Excadrill could be used with their attacks to infinitely recycle resources, kind of like Oranguru. Bunnelby was actually way better than Excadrill, not only because it's a basic and attacks for a colorless energy, but it also can mill your opponent. With its ancient trait Barrage, it could even do both in the same turn, using the first attack to mill and the second turn to recycle a card, or vice versa. Also in standard format, I guess I should mention the Shedinja card that was paired with Oranguru sometimes. Shedinja could be attached to a Pokemon as a tool card and serve as life dew on that Pokemon. And since Oranguru could infinitely recycle previously discarded Shedinja pieces, you could sometimes create a situation where the opponent couldn't win. Also, there's like a million Pokemon with attacks that put item cards or trainer cards from the discard pile into your hand, but most of them suck, and I only mentioned the really great ones. I guess shout out to Regieleki and Dedenne, who have seen play, mostly because of their attack that recycles trainers from the discard pile. Also, an honorable mention must go to Spiritomb, who recovers 2 supporters from the discard pile into your hand and was used in Shocklock decks. Anyways, thanks so much for watching the video. Subscribing would mean the world to me, Let me know in the comments what you think about infinite looping strategies in the Pokemon TCG, or comment down some infinite loops that I might have forgot about. With that said, take care, have a good one.